to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for accepting to be part of this panel. And I must thank India International Center. When Dr. Shamsaran came to PIC in Pune to deliver a lecture, we did talk to him we should do something. But such are the things we talk all the time, that we should do something together. Next time I came to Delhi, I had a word with him. And to cut the long story short, thanks to Dr. Bambawale, Ambassador Bambawale and PIC team, we are able to put this very first large program. I can see many of the faces in the audience who are members of PIC but based in Delhi. This is the first one. With your inputs, efforts, cooperation, we should be able to do a little more of these in future as well. Now coming to the topic. But before I start with the panelists, I want to share a tiny story with you. Post-COVID days, there is this friend of mine who called me. And he said he's trying to book a car. So I said, wonderful. When do you get it? And we talked about brand, price, etc. He said, यार कार तो नहीं आ रही है क्योंकि हाथी के कान में चींटी घुस गई है. I said, what does that mean now? And why do you say this? He says, नहीं कोई chip नहीं आया हुआ है, and hence the car I'm not able to get in time, and that's going to take 3-4 months. So of course, I mean the chip is a lot more powerful than the GT possibly, but he was saying that this bigger car, for that tiny little chip, I'm told that it's going to wait for 3-4 months. And then I tried to tell him the issues that are involved in terms of how the chips come, how many companies, TSMC and everything. Somewhere I might have mentioned the global supply chain, and he was completely bored. He just wasn't keen to listen to any of this. But here's the thing, right? The implications that we see on day-to-day basis of what it means when the global supply chains disrupt to me and you at the household level. Of course, thereafter, we also had the whole war issues, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine, whether it's the Middle East one. Currently, in the morning, we had a long session on the Trump tariffs. But this goes back long time ago, isn't it? The trade routes, as well as the disruptions in trade, because there are trade routes. Thousands of years ago, I read, I haven't verified it, the seal of Mesopotamia in the somewhere around our region, which means the trade existed then. Of course, we all talk about the Silk Route. We talk about the silk and spices trade. Then we refer to Vasco da Gama, Marco Polo, and the whole lot of sea trade happening. Then it gets back to our own context here in Asia, in India, about the colonial era, the kind of trade happened because of the influence, the trade between us and Britain, if you call it trade, right? And these days, it just reminds us that trade can be one way like what it used to be. And the implication of what happened in US on what we are doing from Mumbai to London, right? So it's very interesting. There has been trade and there has been disruption for a long time. This is not as if this has happened now. Of course, all of us blow it a lot bigger, and we must, because that's current and we must discuss it and talk about it. But this has been happening for a long time. And then fast forward to 47 to 91 era, post 91 era, and then comes the COVID and rest of it that I talked about. So there is a whole lot to discuss in terms of the trade, what trade has done, and the disruptions have done, and how do we deal with it. Today's discussion, we thought, we will start with, in a similar flow, we'll talk a bit about what are the global supply chains. And I'll be requesting Dr. Ray to talk about this after a minute and share what exactly they are. I'm sure many of you are experts in the area, but for the rest like me, it's a good idea to first know what is it that we are talking about, what is it that's getting disrupted, so that we can give some color to what are the global supply chains essentially. Then we'll move on to talk about what are the disruptions. We have discussed a great deal in the morning about Trump tariffs. So we'll try to focus a little more on other disruptions than the Trump tariffs. Of course, Trump tariffs is a huge disruption, but we'll also deal with the other disruptions. We'll get to thereafter a bit of specifics like the areas like CBAM, tech, natural resources, and how they are disrupting it. The implications we have in Asia and India, and then we'll move to what is it that is happening globally in terms of the soup of acronyms, right? A whole lot of these organizations or initiatives we talk about, IMEC, IIIW, BRIC, and if there is another one that's invented recently, right? And all of those. And then eventually we'll get to talk about what is it that India is doing and should do further? So that's a bit of the flow there, but it's not regimental. The idea is to hear the experts on what they would want to talk about. And in all of this, we would not miss the, while Dr. Adam is here, on the whole, the Global South approach, because otherwise we would only be looking at from one lens all the time, in terms of the lens dictated by the ones who are holding the media, right? So we'll also get to hear that perspective. With the opportunity to have somebody like Dr. Wadhawan here, who has been at the helm of the affairs, who has looked at it from a vintage point and has shaped up policies for an era, and has been looking at it for a long time. So we'll get to hear him. And of course, Dr. Ranade, who conducted the morning session also. So I'll start with something super basic. Dr. Ray, if you could give some color to what exactly are the global supply chains in terms of some numbers, in terms of quantity, quality, shape, and where does Asia fit in? Where does India fit in? How global are they? Are they global, regional? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
Working? No,
yeah. Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you to PIC for this invitation. Now, thanks to COVID, I think all of us are quite familiar with supply chains, because for the first time we heard that we are not getting these masks. There was, if you remember, that there was these masks which were in short supply, the N95, and then hand sanitizers was in short supply. Everything was in short supply. Till then, we hadn't thought that, supply chains were that important or it impacted us every day, but now we know better. So just to give a very, basic example of what a supply chain is, many of you use iPhone or an iPad. Now, if you just think about the parts that go into an iPhone or an iPad, so there'll be the chip, of course, but then there is the camera, the lens, and so many other things. Now, each of these parts are actually not made all in one country. So the glass, for example, would be a Corning, or the lens would be from somewhere else. Then the chips typically are made in Taiwan, TSMC. So what a supply chain does, or a lead firm does, basically, Apple in this case, will get all these parts together, and all of these, and so it's basically all these parts will be imported into whichever country is assembling that iPad. Most often it would be China. All these parts come into China, they are assembled there, some value addition is there, then they are shipped back to the US, where the branding, etc., would take place, and then it is sold worldwide. So often you hear this term that, manufactured in China, but sold worldwide. And this is the reason for that, because all these parts from various countries come together in a supply chain. Now, supply chains are not new. Since the 1980s, a lot of trade is actually happening in supply chains. And a typical example of a supply chain activity is that a lot of intermediate goods are exported and imported. So all these parts that I mentioned, say Taiwan would be exporting it, various other countries would be exporting various parts of it, and China would be importing it, and finally the final product would actually also be imported into US, where it would be then branded. So trade in intermediate goods is a very important part of, or phenomenon which is quite recent. And the way we have looked at trade typically in terms of final goods, this is, it undermines the way you should actually look at trade, which is in value added and trade in intermediate goods. So where does all the countries fit in? So you have the supply chains of various countries. So you have what is called Factory Asia, which is led by China and Japan and South Korea, and where all countries from Southeast Asia are contributing to. But you also have Factory North America, Factory Europe, etc. Similar kind of chains. Of course, President Trump has managed to disrupt a lot of that, and I won't go into that right now. But where India comes in all of this is that our global value chain activity or supply chain activity has been modest. We've had some successes, some industries where we've done quite well. The auto industry, for one, we've done quite well. Some chemicals we have done well. But unfortunately, in the most labor-intensive goods, we have not done so well.
Is there a number? I'll continue with you for a minute or two just to give this color, and then I'll move on
Sure.
to others. Is there a number to indicate, I'm sure I and you both have read it, but for the benefit of the audience, to indicate what is the level of India's engagement in the global value chain? And how updated is that? Because we all refer back to pretty old numbers.
Yeah, there is a number. In fact, the data for this actually comes from OECD, TIVA, Trade in Value Added. It varies. It's about 30% for India. And the typical way in which it is measured is by what is called backward integration, where you buy a lot of imported intermediate inputs, or forward integration, where your export is actually going into value chains of other countries. So the sum of both backward and forward integration measure up to the total participation of a country in a value chain.
Where does India fit or Asia fit vis-a-vis the rest of the world in terms of this number?
India is actually on the low side. In fact, compared to its Asian peers, it is quite low. But that is also typical of a large country usually, because it is actually catering to a large domestic market. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll be moving on to others at various places, but if there's anyone who would want to just comment on this part of it, what are the global GVCs or supply chains? If there anyone who would want to throw any other color onto it, very happy to hear that.
I can add
Please.
some more kind of statistics, like Dr. Rao, she has talked about the statistics for India. So she has mentioned 30%, but worldwide there is a significant increase in global supply chains. In 2011, it was around 50%, 49%. But now the recent statistics in 2019, so it has reached more than 71%. And there is a kind of race between all countries in the global south. They want to have and to take a share of the global supply chain, because this is the future. No one now, no single country is able to produce from A to Z all the product process on its land. So the only way to survive is to have a share from international trade is to attract foreign direct investments, multinational corporations, and also to motivate their own investors to invest and to invest in intermediate goods. And sometimes governments and countries in the global south specifically, they initiate to have their own enterprises, so they can have a boost to and attract other national and foreign investors to also to produce locally some of the goods that will be later on exported. And that applies to Egypt. So if you allow me to give you also examples from Egypt, since I'm Egyptian. So in Egypt we are now investing heavily in special economic zones, establishing new zones, especially in Suez Canal, just for the sake of having more and more share from the global supply chains. We have Indian investors, and it is increasing since we have a strategic partnership with India. Also, we are attracting investors from all over the world, from China, from Russia, from also European countries. Recently, just right now, we are talking the Spain king and queen. They are, both of them, they are in Egypt, and they are also discussing more of opportunities for investments, and this will extend more of supply chains opportunities for Egypt.
Thank you so much. Please do.
Just to add some more dramatic points, the automotive supply chain, there's a city called Detroit in Michigan state of USA. Across the border was the state of Ontario, which Toronto is the capital. A typical car production, GM or Ford, used to go back and forth 25 times. Sometimes just for a paint shop across, just 20, 30, 40 mile journey back and forth. So until 2016, November, President Trump got elected, but before that, there was no problem. But after he started imposing these tariffs, it was a huge headache for the automotive industry of North America. Because every time the thing is going back and forth, 25 times, every time they have to pay an import duty. So that's the importance of supply chain. That the other example is the US is the biggest coffee drinker in the world, but not even a gram of coffee is produced in the US. So it is a supply chain. Chocolate, all cocoa is produced in Africa, but guess where it's consumed? I don't think Africa, not even a gram of cocoa grows in Switzerland, but we know Swiss chocolates and Austrian chocolates. So there are so many examples, much before all this turmoil now, that the French fries that you eat in Belgium and all, but perhaps the potatoes are grown somewhere else. Take the example of Egypt. Just a few miles away from Egypt is the southern coast of Europe, and Egypt is not part of EU. So all the manufacturing wants to locate in Egypt because of SEZs or tax haven or tax holidays, but they want to just go 30 miles, but that's a supply chain. So this drawing these lines in the sand and calling this is one country, this is my country, your country, Canada, USA, that's where the problem is. That supply chains have to cross boundary lines. These boundary lines were drawn by very wise men in the sand, and that's where the problem is. Otherwise...
So let me add my comment also to it. So you see, essentially, supply chains are nothing new. Adam Smith spoke about, specialization and division of labor, and no manufacturer has entirely manufactured anything entirely himself or herself. So people have always depended in manufacturing on other suppliers, on inputs. What happened is that as the manufacturing process got more and more complex, products got more complex, the element of supply chain in producing something went up. You automatically had to depend on more people who were specialized in those particular components. And then what happened was the revolution in transportation. So when transportation costs came down, then the supply chain dispersed geographically. So the same supply chain which you had in the times of Adam Smith has transformed into the global value chain. And the underlying calculus which determines these decisions, what do I make myself, what do I get from someone, that underlying cost minimization or profit maximization calculus has remained the same. But the parameters of that calculus have changed as transport costs came down. There's a risk parameter also which was grossly undervalued by manufacturers investing, especially in China. So you had supply chains developing in a certain manner, concentrated in China. You were not weighting the risk element adequately, even though China was showing enough signs, of belligerence and showing enough signs of these strategic issues coming to a head. And they did come to a head. So that is what I think supply chains are all about. And now we are in a phase of recalibration where the weightages to profit and risk have been adjusted. But ultimately, the calculus remains the same. It's a profit maximization exercise where you balance the risk and the cost advantages.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful. We thought before we talk about disruption to the supply chains, we'll know what supply chains are. Now we'll move to the disruption, and then eventually we'll get down to what to do about it, what world should do about it, what we should do about it. But we'll focus on what is the disruption first, right? So few questions, and then I'll open up with Dr. Ray and others could kind of chip in. The assessment of disruption in terms of the impact that will have globally, and there are numbers we read about in terms of the impact on GDP that we heard also in the morning, impact on trade, how much it's down would be down because of this, impact specifically on Asia, because we are sitting in India, impact on India. Also, I'll be keen to understand the impact on China and US as well, the other way around, right? What is the impact, how temporary, how permanent? So that's kind of a broader zone. We'll start with Dr. Ray, then I'll move to Dr. Wadhawan, and then others could also pitch in. Dr. Ray, will begin with you. Eventually, we'll get down to talk about the soup of the acronyms and rest of it eventually later. But first, our assessment of what is the impact, not just the Trump tariffs, because that's been discussed enough in the morning. We can't ignore it. That's the biggest thing happening, biggest elephant in the room. But that aside, while we mention that, also if you could mention the other things that are happening around that are creating this. Dr. Ray, first you, and then Dr. Wadhawan.
Thank you. So in terms of the impact, I think we have to look at it, from the short run, medium term, and the long term. Short term, of course, as you all know, that the disruption is immediate. And some of these impacts are being felt worldwide. There is just a blog that has come out from Richard Baldwin, which he has shown that how employment has in the US has declined. But let me just give you a flavor of what we've been trying to do. We have actually taken the tariffs. I'll start with the tariffs first, and I'll talk about the other things. So we have this scenario because in the context of India or Brazil, for that matter, the tariffs are now about 50%. So we've looked at the scenario that what is the implication on GDP, welfare, etc. And we see that GDP, we've done some kind of CG modeling of that, and we see that GDP falls for almost all the regions of the world. But it falls for USA as well. And that is the interesting thing. So it is not that the USA is coming out a winner in this case. And then, of course, then there are specific implications of that, especially on our textile and clothing sector, on the electronic sector, two sectors that we have looked at. We've looked at the BRICS as a whole, BRIC rather, not South Africa, but Brazil, Russia, India, and China. The tariff in the case of China is at about 30% because they have that 90-day period which they are waiting out to see if the deal goes through, etc. The impact on all of these countries is with that 50% tariff or even with the 25% tariff is quite significant in the sense that it is lowering their GDP, it is lowering their exports. There is going to be some trade diversion that will happen as a result because if you look at it this way, that if you cannot export to the US, in India's case, for example, we 20% of our exports go through the US. So if some of the sectors are exempt, of course, because pharmaceuticals, electronics, and processed oil, for example, is exempt. For the rest, which means that if you cannot sell to the US, you will have to sell it elsewhere. Either you sell it domestically or you sell it elsewhere. So some trade diversion will happen. But these are the things which will be there in the short term. In the medium term or in the long term, some reorganization of the supply chains will happen because of the costs that are going to increase if these tariffs continue for some time. If they're struck down, of course, that is a different story. But if they continue for some time, what will happen is that it's just increasing the cost of the American producers, for example. The auto parts, for example, they were importing, say, from India. Those auto parts become expensive. The auto parts that they were importing from Canada, they become expensive. So what does it mean? They can actually reshore. Now, reshoring, of course, means that they will be locating their production in some other country. This is exactly the opposite of what was the intended impact. But then reshoring is not costless, and it also requires time because you cannot find a supplier tomorrow or a partner tomorrow. It will take some time. All the due diligence has to be done, etc., till you find a partner. So the impact will be basically. The greatest impact actually from all of this is that the uncertainty that has, in the trading system that has been created, it means that a lot of investment decisions are being postponed and a lot of, wait and watch kind of approach is being taken by many firms that, we will wait it out. Some firms are saying that we will wait it out for 3 more years. And then, once this, the tariff episode is over, then we will take the decisions. But there are other disruptions that are also taking place from 1st January 2026. CBAM comes into the picture. CBAM is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And this will have an impact on at least 2 of our items of export, which is iron and steel and aluminium. We'll see how it pans out, but as of now, there will be, at least for both steel and aluminium, these are quite important as far as our exports to the EU is concerned. And of course, on top of that, there are the other things caused by the 2 wars that are going on, etc.
No, thank you so much. I think we'll get Dr. Wadhawan to comment on this before I move.
Yeah, thank you. So, looking at disruption of global supply chains, we have to see it again in the context of, certain risks building up over time, and then those risks through a peculiar set of circumstances, actually devolving on us. So the risks were building up in terms of, China's economic growth and China's economic domination, which soon got combined with a sort of militarism. China was muscling around in South China Sea, around Taiwan, and that worried the US, that, the world is overly dependent on China economically. China is acquiring, through its economic success, the military clout to be a strategic challenge to the US. And the second circumstance that happened was Donald Trump. He tried to deal with it in the most ham-handed and self-destructive manner by putting tariffs in his first term. So he should have realized that, tariffs are going to harm the US more than anyone else. And tariffs are not going to overnight do the kind of adjustments he was expecting. By the very nature of things, you can't do investments in a overnight time frame and readjust the global supply chain. So in the most ham-handed manner, he dealt with it. And that is when the risk devolved. And of course, then COVID happened. The icing on the cake was COVID. So the supply chain broke down completely, partly because of the tariffs, partly because of COVID, physical disruption, and the impact of concentration in China came to the fore. So the entire concentration risk that was building up over time, that devolved. The strategic risk devolved. And, the realization, I hope it dawns quickly, that tariffs are not the solution. In between, you had the Biden term. So Biden did what is sensible. He realized he has to do it over time. You have to shape supply chains through incremental investments. There's no question even of an overnight rush out of China, that suddenly everyone is going to rush out of China and rush in somewhere else. The adjustment cannot happen like that. Adjustment will happen on incremental investments. If some companies invested in China, for the next set of investments, they will choose some third destination, whether it is onshoring into the US, whether it is friend-shoring into a friendly country, or whether it is regionalization, into Mexico, or for Europe into Eastern Europe, or whether it is, developing multiple sources for critical products like these permanent magnets and all those chips for cars. So all those things. So Biden brought in the CHIP Act, and he was moving in the right direction. These things are going to take time. So in some ways, the world is going to learn the hard way that adjustments will happen. In fact, the survey of companies, 60 to 80% companies are resolved that they will transform their supply chains and de-risk them over a 5 to 10 year, 15-year horizon. 80% are resolved. There was a survey, and so far only 2% have been able to fully implement their plans. So these things are going to take time. And of course, there's some other complexities in how supply chains will shape in the future. And I'll say something on that later.
But if I may ask that, a follow-up question quickly. There is also this view on impact on US, right? You get to watch these reels and videos these days where a member of equivalent of their parliament, Congress or Senate showing up a banana and saying how costly it is becoming, or somebody else talking about something else that's become very, very costly. And then we also look at the macroeconomic numbers there, which look kind of costly but not too costly. Where do you see, Dr. Wadhawan, in terms of the impact on US currently as it stands, and in your opinion, what it would be if the story continues as is? As is means chaotic, because there is no as is either.
So the impact will be huge, as Ms. Ray mentioned just now, that people will carve their trade around the US. Let us say this is the world, and people sitting on the stage are the US, and there's a certain level of water we are sitting in. If I put a barrier around me, then the water level in the rest of the room will rise. So if water represents trade flows. So Trump is not realizing that he's undermining American success, by painting a wrong picture of America being cheated by the world, which is absolutely bogus from any yardstick. They are the richest developed nation in the world. Even Japan is poor compared to America, if you compare the per capita incomes. To say that I've been cheated by the whole world, including India sitting at $2,800 per capita income, and you're sitting there as the richest country in the world, your problem is lack of equity, which they will never address. So they will learn the hard way. That
Lack of equity in
and
US itself, among themselves.
Yeah, so in the US, inflation has not had its full impact yet. For one, these tariffs were sort of forewarned in a sense, and companies built up inventories, and then it delayed the impact. So all those impacts are going to come in now. And I'm told, President Trump is now wishing that the Supreme Court undoes the tariffs. He doesn't want to undo them himself. But ultimately, the tariffs will cause a huge, problem to the
Fair point.
US. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have a comment, then I'll need response from both Dr. Ranade and Dr. Ray if you have, and then I'll come to you, Dr. Adam. Pune International Center is based in Pune, though it belongs to all of India in a sense. So I have some stories from Pune. I'll share with both of you and take your questions. As at Pune and Maharashtra, when I talked with auto industries, they looked okay, and I talked with dozens of them, auto and auto component. They looked okay. I said, like, why do you look okay? Like, it's 50% is steep, 52.5. I said, look, who's my competitor? The Europe, it'll be bloody costly for US. The other one is China. It's 64% on auto component. That's what they're paying. So I'm still okay. Rather, my invoice to US customer has increased in the last few weeks, is what they told. Some of that is kind of up front loading also, as Dr. Wadhawan mentioned, because of having early information. Then we talked with textile guys in Solapur in Maharashtra. They looked worried, right? To the extent that they have supplies to US, which is not more than about 5% on an average of the entire Solapur if I take the region. They looked a bit worried. Then I talked with people in Konkan, because they'll have shrimps. They didn't look as worried as their friends in Andhra Pradesh, because a whole lot of it is in Andhra Pradesh as compared to Konkan. And then, of course, gem and jewelry in Navi Mumbai, apart from Surat, New Bombay. And they look kind of a bit concerned, but the number of jobs there, while there are jobs, but they're not as high as possibly textile and the other industries, right? That's a bit of my view on what's happening from what I've heard. Would want to hear from you, Dr. Ranade and Dr. Ray. What's your view in terms of sectoral impact in India? Which sectors impacted, which sectors not impacted? So if you can get like just mentioning 1, 2, 3 impacted, 1, 2, 3 not impacted, so that's a bit easier for all of us to understand from your perspective.
Yeah, we said this session is on disruptions to supply chain, and as you said, let's not only talk about Trump tariffs. So let me give an example. There was this sudden flight of the Prime Minister from a neighboring country, and overnight things were in a big turmoil.
Nobel Prize.
And and what happened is, it turned out that a lot of the garment factories in Bangladesh were actually owned by Indians. And Bangladesh, because Bangladesh has a GSP access to Europe, Generalized System of Preferences, which is zero duty access. Many of those factories had to shut down because of the political situation. This is an example of a supply chain where we thought this is a friendly country. It makes sense to locate your garment factories in Bangladesh because you have zero duty access, and it's an example of supply disruption. And then another example, which is of course Ukraine. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, suddenly we discovered that there are 17,000 Indian students pursuing their medical MBBS degrees. So this is a supply chain into our medical education, but anyway. Your question was that which sectors in India? So clearly, for whatever reasons of the supply chain, garment factories were affected, and India's garment exports are anyway struggling against Vietnam and even Sri Lanka. We are actually in absolute dollar terms behind them. So this is an additional disruption which we did not want. One more point, Prashant, I wanted to mention to you that you say that auto components from China is 64%, auto components from India maybe have 35%. But please note that India's productivity and cost is actually higher. So 35% on India's auto components going into USA is still more expensive than 60% on China. It could happen. So it's not necessary.
Sorry to interrupt, but in Ajit's situation, right, what changed if you look at it? What changed from what it used to be with reference to the Trump tariffs? It's still 12% odd,
I know.
benefit
So the limited,
India in a relative sense. A terrible way to put it, but 12% benefit.
So my limited point is just because we still have a tariff differential in our favor doesn't automatically mean that we may be positively impacted. But clearly the shrimp, I think we had a very good, huge, I think 40-50% market share of the shrimp exports to the USA. So that has taken a big beating, because I don't think that is easy to get out of. Even though you said your Konkan shrimp exporters were not affected.
Because it did not have much to export from Konkan to US.
I know a company called Welspun. They are a pretty major supplier to Walmart and Costco in the US, which these towels. You know, it's white label, so they don't sell it on a Welspun brand. Maybe they've started selling on brand. That is going to be suddenly affected. You know, the entire order will have to go. But as I think Dr. Anup also said earlier, it's not easy for the buyer also to switch. It's not as if overnight they'll get towels from Vietnam. There is quality certification. There are factories which have been approved by. There's a long time. So what should I say? Startup time or overhead time, which you have to factor in. Only then you get approval. First you take a test batch, then you take a longer batch. So it's not easy to switch. Right. So I think on balance, I feel some sectors are going to be badly affected. Shrimp is an example. But some sectors, even though the tariff has gone up, may actually have some persistence.
Fair point. Sorry, please.
See, the other way to look at it is that in some ways, the aggregate global demand and the aggregate global supply is not going to change. To the extent Indian suppliers have been displaced out of the US, someone else has to fill that space. And we will occupy that space. So our manufacturers are clever, and for an individual manufacturer, dependence on the US market is not more than 20, 30, 40% max.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they will cut their rates and tap into other markets. So otherwise, so I don't foresee that in the medium term, there'll be any very major disruption, and basically the US will carve a barrier around itself, and the world will, find ways around the US.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. And then Dr. Adam, if you would have anything to add.
Yeah, so I think one point that we, in fact, taking over from Dr. Wadhawan's point, that the elasticity of demand will be very important. So how responsive is the demand to the change in price, basically? Now, in some sectors, it is going to be important. So, for example, garments, it will be important. Shrimps, it might be because, again, it is... diamonds, for example, one sector that could have been impacted, but is not likely to be impacted that much.
The value of labor in the total value isn't significant.
It depends. And then there are things like auto parts that could be impacted. Now, in all of this, my assessment is that it is the garments sector which is going to be much more impacted, and there's a reason for that. Most of our garments are actually, a lot of it is actually women's, clothes, tops and shirts, and which are catering specifically to the US market according to those specifications. So even if you change that, it will take time to change the specifications. It can't be done like in the medium term. Of course, you can change it, but in the short term, there will be an impact. Even for shrimps, we are hearing that the China could be an alternate market for shrimps. Though, to be fair, the US is the largest consumer of shrimp and lobsters in the world, so that also is there. So I think the impact will be depending on all of these factors, and as has been mentioned, there will be some trade diversion. So other countries might actually pick up whatever we are not being able to sell to the US. We may actually sell some more to domestically, given the GST rationalization that has happened. So even that would be one of the other impacts.
Before I come to Dr. Adam, a couple of super quick questions to you, Dr. Ray. And we'll just possibly 1 or 2 line responses on these ones if possible. One is on CBAM, and then I'll also have one on the natural resources part of it, because I looked at your study on the EVs, essentially EV industry, and what impact it will have. So first on CBAM, the impact that will happen, and we're talking only about the steel and iron and steel industry here, and we're talking about large companies, not small companies. Is that understanding right? Are we also looking at impact on others? And while we're talking about UK, Australia, and others kind of also trying to follow suit, so just a couple of line commentary on that, and then I'll move to the natural resources.
Okay. CBAM, actually, for the small industries, there is a de minimis clause, which means that they will be exempt from it. But it is also a fact that, the requirement in CBAM will be MRV. Basically, you have to monitor your emissions and then report it, and then if there is a carbon market, then you trade in it. Now we are in the process of developing our carbon market, and that is possibly going to be operational again next year, 2026. And just as of today, I think the EU has said that if there is a carbon market, if our carbon market is operational, the credits that you earn on that can be actually exchanged, or we can be exempt from the CBAM impact.
Okay.
So
Alright.
they've said that. So which means that once our market becomes operational, that will be actually a good thing, because whatever you are earning as credit, you can some of it will be offset at least.
Thank you. The other thing on the EVs, we also talked about the whole dependence on China, notwithstanding the Trump tariff, because we are talking about the disruption in supply chains. The other element being our dependence we have on the natural resources, on especially in the, let's say, taking EV industry as an example of it, on the rare earth materials. What's your study? What is it saying at the moment, and how far are we, or is it near impossible that we would ever be able to kind of reduce or eliminate that dependence?
Yeah, now this one is tricky, because the thing is that these critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, etc. Though people are now considering copper also to be part of it, we have almost all countries import it. And China is now putting a stranglehold on at least the rare earths, which is the other set of, not these, but there are many other minerals that go into the production of many of these parts, EV parts, especially batteries. The good thing is that alternatives are coming out. So replacement for lithium, replacement for nickel, etc. are coming up. And so even if there is a stranglehold by China, through R&D, I think that can be overcome. Basically now we are talking about batteries which will use sodium. Basically salt.
Pune company is working very well on
Yes.
that, so well aware of it.
Yes.
But
yeah. So when they will become functional, we don't know. But at least there's hope that there will be alternatives. Now the only problem at the moment is that we are neither manufacturing the batteries or many of the other parts. But I think a new factory is coming up in India, and probably it is in Pune, if I'm not wrong. But it will become operational in 2027.
These things take time. But thank you for that, Dr. Adam. We'll take if you have any comment on this, and then I'll be coming to Dr. Wadhawan about the whole institutional architecture that we have. But before that, we'll take your comment.
So I want to highlight something here, that fragmentation of global supply chain is, as so far we are explaining, they are really disruptive, and they have already negative impacts on India and other countries also in the global south. But what I believe that global south countries or developing nations, they should take this as an opportunity to try to get the maximum positive impact from this kind of problems that the world is facing, and to turn it to our own benefits. And what we can do in this regard is that, first of all, we should diversify our production proactively, and not to just forget about that old production technique of only depending on big markets or great powers and producer suppliers and other markets in EU and the United States. So it's better to diversify our trading partners and to extend more of friendship relationships with other nations also within the global south. Another important thing is that we should stop just as we are countries in the global south, is we are mainly focusing in global supply chain to, like Dr. Ajit example of coffee beans and cocoa, so it's coming from the global south. So what we are doing for the north, what we are supplying to the north is that we are providing raw materials, we are providing agriculture goods, we are mostly focusing on low value added manufacturing goods. So what we should do is that we should now move to the upstream in level in the value chain, which means that we must now move forward more in manufacturing and produce more of high value added goods to compete. And China has also a successful experience in that. So we should also learn from other global south countries' experience and replicate in our own nations. And here I'm referring to India and to Egypt. So this is actually what we should do. And lastly is that we should move towards the South-South cooperation. So I'm not saying that we should stop dealing with the North or United States or EU, but we should also try to work together and to have more of kind of like Dr. Ray, she has mentioned, and others also, esteemed panelists here, that we should have more of friend-shoring and near-shoring. So this, I believe that would be our future, is not to just think about it, it is only having negative impact, but there are much good things I believe they are coming in the future.
Thank you so much. That's a great optimistic note. I have two questions, one for Dr. Wadhawan and then Dr. Ranade. I'll want to mention both the questions right away. And thereafter, we'll have a couple of questions from the audience. And by that time, it'll be about 3:20 and we'll conclude on time. So, Dr. Ranade, I'll tell you your question and then I'll move to Dr. Wadhawan. The question that I want to ask is about the opportunities for reform for India. But before that, Dr. Wadhawan, we looked at, we of course, in the morning also we talked about what's happened to WTO. I think that's kind of well understood now. Possibly a line or two on that. And more importantly, there is this whole set of institutions or initiatives, like there is IMEC, there is IIUU, there is BRIC, and there are a bunch of these things. To what extent are they able to shape up the reconfiguration of the global trade and hence the supply chain? And also, if you look at historically, whether Bretton Woods institutions or post-1945 institutions, either they come after a huge shock or they take too long time or both, right? Given all of that knowledge, given what is happening now, your take on to what extent are they able to shape up now and in the near future or immediate future? Over to you.
Yeah, so, as Ambassador Deepak mentioned in the morning, today we are in a state of the world where no rules are being followed. So, talking about WTO reform and restoration of the WTO is a very long shot at this time, where, existing rules are being flouted left, right, and center. And, of course, a multilateral trade liberalization is the most efficient, and it's the least distortionary. Any bilateral or regional or plurilateral will have some trade distortion, trade diversion effects. So ideal is multilateral, but unfortunately that has collapsed. Again, out of the same perversity which has guided President Trump's tariffs, that the world is cheating me, whereas the reality is totally different. And as Deepak said, all these negotiations for our bound rates had a give and take. We gave them a lot on IPRs, we gave them a lot on services, and we helped the US economy to transform away from manufacturing. It is not as if manufacturing somehow, America got cheated out of manufacturing. They didn't get cheated out of manufacturing, they graduated out of manufacturing into a higher orbit. So I don't foresee the WTO, becoming functional very soon. The dispute resolution system, even in some modified form, will be toothless. Because you see the West, and this goes beyond Trump, the West has come to this conclusion that rules are good. We want everyone generally to follow rules because we don't want others to do to us what we at times might do to them. And moment they break a rule, WTO or no WTO, you can enforce it. You can, through various threats, you can make sure that the world at large follows all the rules.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it jiski lathi uski bhais? I'll translate for others.
It is, but the West will now always retain an escape channel. No matter what rules come in through WTO, they will retain an escape channel. Of course, Trump found the security route, security measures. So I don't see the WTO coming back in a meaningful form, but the world needs it. Because by and large, having some rules which everyone follows is good for everyone. Even though, as I said, some people will flout them totally. And as to whether the others are good substitutes, certainly it's the second best option. And the broader the configuration, the better. A bilateral is least efficient. A regional arrangement is more efficient. A cross-regional arrangement, whether it is RCEP or...
So while you are there, sir, sorry to interrupt. While you are at RCEP, right? And who better to talk about this new? What's your take? We heard a take in the morning from Mr. Deepak. What's your take? What was it, and what do you think of it now? What did you think then? What do you think now about it?
See, first thing is that we must, believe in the fact that openness is good. Unilateral openness is good, even if the other person is not responding. The best test of that is our 1991 reform. As Ajit knows, in my view, that was our first and biggest FTA. Biggest FTA was the 1991 reform where we liberalized our tariffs. Then we entered into so many FTAs. Now, no one in their right mind can say that we are worse off today than we were in 1991. Whether it is external stability or whether it is economic growth, we are better off. So that is one thing you must believe in. Otherwise, you learn lessons the hard way. UK has learned it through Brexit, that you disregard basic economic facts, you pay a price. So RCEP, in my view, was a big miss. Now, let's deal with China first. So China, certainly, they dominate the world economically across many value chains. We are not the only example of, the world in some ways, being dominated by China's economic strength. And we don't have an FTA with China, but they are our biggest trading partner, and in some ways a problem for our external stability. So FTA is not the problem. The problem is our lack of competitiveness. When we can resolve our competitiveness issue, we will be able to deal with China and deal with anyone else. And others are dealing with them. There are Vietnams and others in this world. So, and if you have a barrier, let us say, I don't want to enter RCEP, I don't want to have an agreement with EU, I want to have a very conservative agreement with the US, you still retain some barriers. And that is the worst way to become competitive. You'll never become competitive. And dealing with China, RCEP would have given us an institutionalized platform to deal with China. There was a 14-15 country platform. RCEP rules are very precise. And if China had flouted rules, we always accuse China of cheating to the extent they do bend the rules. But then RCEP would have been a good forum to deal with China to the extent they flouted rules. The other thing people say is that we already had a trade agreement with all the other countries except China, New Zealand, and Australia. New Zealand, Australia, we can sign. Yeah. Australia, we have signed. New Zealand also will sign. So why do you want China? The answer to that is that our trade agreements are of a lower order. RCEP is a higher order trade agreement. They have all sorts of modern, global value chain promoting provisions, accumulation of value across countries and all those things. So I bet if some study is done, it's a research idea I'm floating today. Some study is done, Indian trade with ASEAN and other RCEP countries before and after RCEP. I'm sure there will be what in economics is called a structural shift. So RCEP will be a big miss, and
Thank
China,
you.
no China.
But thank you for very candidly kind of sharing your thoughts on this. Dr. Ranade, the point is we talked about the global supply chains, the disruption. We talked about which sectors it's disrupting, especially in India, how it's disrupting every country, how it would also disrupt US, what has happened to WTO, what would happen to the other initiatives. Now comes to point, because we are talking in India, what is it that India should do? And I'm sure Dr. Wadhawan hinted to a thing about what we did in 1991. We kind of brought down the tariffs, and that gliding path in this sense kind of like helped us to a great extent. What do you think should be the reforms that you would recommend at this moment? Then I'll also want a quick view from Dr. Wadhawan again on this topic, and then we'll get to questions, and then we'll get to conclude.
See, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has 1 million companies registered in India, but there are 72 million micro, small and medium enterprises. And these MSMEs, as they are called, they contribute roughly 30 to 40% to industrial employment, 30 to 40% to output, and 30 to 40% of exports. But not 30 to 40% of profits from exports, not 30 to 40% bank credit, not 30 to 40% of a digital footprint and everything. So that's the reform agenda. They are very important part of the supply chain.
Thank you.
But we have to do a lot to make sure, of course, GST and making the country a frictionless, borderless market has helped a lot. So a peanut seller from Jharkhand can tap into Pune's consumer market, but still there are a lot of problems. So the supply chain, to truly reflect its benefits and the ease of the flow, much needs to be done. So if you ask me a one-point thing, I think just focus on the MSME to get
Thank
them
you.
into supply chain.
Dr. Wadhawan, if you have any 1-2 liners to say about this.
You see, we are a hyperactive nation as far as answering this question, what we should do is concerned. Only problem is we don't do it. So we are always in that mode. What should we do? If you look at an annual budget exercise, it is, conditioned by that. What should we do? So I remember being in government, you spend the whole year, discovering these things which you need to do. You look at the global best practice and everything, and then you come up with something to do. The budget comes and it's announced with great fanfare. And the moment it is over, you start with the same exercise again. So we are never, so we are in constant search for that elusive truth. What should we do? And we have not found it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the truth is there. The truth is as old as the Industrial Revolution. There was an Industrial Revolution, countries developed a manufacturing sector, countries grew and achieved great success, whether it was the West first and then the other nations, the Taiwan, the Singapores, Southeast Asia, the China, Vietnam. And believe me, the answer as to what we should do is quite simple. But we have made a rocket science out of it. We have a prescriptive answer to it. If you look at our pronouncements, we've done apparently 60, 70,000 simplifications for industry. But the investors are not recognizing that. Investment is falling, private investment, domestic is falling, FDI, net FDI is falling. So somewhere we are looking for something which is there before us. And what China did, what Vietnam did, at one level is very simple. What did they do? Create a good investment environment that is credible and secure in the foreseeable future. There is no annual budgetary exercise to change your customs duties, to change your tax rates, to change a million things, because every year you draw up a clean slate and then paint a new picture. So the simple message is China created an SEZ, brought in the investor, single point of contact with some SEZ person in charge. He showed them the land, he showed them the water connection, the power connection, the utilities, the rail connection, the road connection. He gave them a 2-page direct access code, a 2-page indirect access code, and said, okay, start your work and open your factory. And then, we sometimes feel that the Chinese are authoritarian, they can do what we can't do. Absolute wrong message to learn from the Chinese success. They treated their investors with kid gloves. Had they treated the investors with the way they treat their population as authoritarians, the investors would have fled long back. So you have to treat the investors with kid gloves, give them a platform which is stable, secure, and predictable for the next 30 years. कि आप आओ यहाँ invest करो और आपको कोई छेड़ेगा नहीं. You have to deal with one person, the development commissioner of the SEZ. We try to do that. We are perhaps one of the few examples where SEZs have failed. So the answer to the question at one level is naive, and at another level, going by our experience, maybe it is beyond us, but I'm sure it is not beyond us.
Thank you. I think Dr. Adam has a quick point to make. I'm looking at time. I have about 7 minutes. I'll take a quick point from her. I'll take at least a couple of questions, and then we'll conclude.
So I just want to add one thing, is that supply chains is about trade. And for trade, we need to invest heavily in infrastructure, make infrastructure to be more and more well developed. And beside infrastructure is very important point is trade facilitation and logistics. And this is one of the main challenges that is facing developing nations. Also, we have example from India and from Egypt. In India, for example, logistic cost is 14% of GDP, and if you compare it to OECD's 8 to 10%. In Egypt, similarly, because of the geopolitical flashpoints and struggles that we are currently facing. So the Suez Canal has negatively impacted. So we need to invest heavily in Egypt, in ports, and also in Alexandria, in Suez, and we are also extending more of our investments in infrastructure for also other kind of, to divert the traditional Suez Canal trade route. So we need not to forget about, this is my point, about logistics and investments in trade corridors.
Thank you so much, very well made. I'll take questions. There is one at the end, I'll come to you. There is one at this end, and there is one here. I'll unfortunately not have a opportunity to take many more questions because there are wonderful sessions coming after this, and I don't want you to miss those as well. So whosoever has the mic will start with the right here, then left there, and the lady here in the second row. My apologies to those who are not able to ask the question. We'll take these three. Yeah, pass on the mic, please. For all the three questions, so that we can bunch them and we can respond.
Hi, my question
I'll
is
come
for
to you
Ajit.
if you have time for after that.
Hi, my question is for Ajit. Do you think China will, in the coming years, open up its consumer market for the rest of Asia to export, like the US did in the first wave of globalization?
Thank you. We'll take the questions collectively first. Yeah, second one.
I don't have a question as such, but I have a euphemistic statement if the moderator allows me.
If it's a statement and not a memo, yes.
Just a statement.
Yeah.
I think it would be imperative and right to say that we should save the nations from the nationalists at this point in time. Save the nations from the nationalists.
Thank you, well taken, point heard. Thank you. We'll come here. No, sorry, the mic is coming if you could.
So in terms of US's preparedness or readiness, in terms of substituting what items they have imposed tariffs on, like what is their state of readiness and preparedness?
Good question, thank you. Because there was a statement, we'll get a question on the front row also, because the lady here had raised hand. Here, in front of you. Do you have questions still? Please.
No, I just want to make an observation, and that's all, a very brief one.
If you have one-liner, otherwise I'll get to the question.
No,
please.
it's a little more than a one line.
Okay.
See, I just want
Two
to
for
tell
you.
that, thank you so much. I just want to tell that some years ago when Arvind Subramaniam was the chief economic advisor, similar session was there and at the WWF in the auditorium next door. So that was my first time
your
that,
point?
yeah, the first time I had listened to him in person. And he was all gung-ho about China's, great, China's
your
great,
point,
great
My apologies, your
advancement, advancement in, the trade and everything. After several years, COVID happened. See, I would just like to tell that instead of comparing all the time India's growth with China, I mean, as far as trade is concerned, let us not do that, because I don't think
Point
that
taken.
China has a
Is there another
holistic
question
growth.
there? Please ask your question.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you for the comment. We'll take that question, third question.
Mr. Wadhawan, sir, during Corona time, we had a very big issue of semiconductor supply chain because of China. And still, I think we are facing the same problem. And still, we are unable to have our own. We are counting on Taiwan and other countries. And near future, we will be quantum computing and AI. How we are going to deal this situation?
Thank you so much. We'll take these questions. I think there are 3 questions, and I'll open it up for Dr. Ranade, Dr. Wadhawan, Dr. Ray, all of you.
I have a one-line answer. More than 110 countries already export to China, but India's share of China's market share, India's share of consumer market in China is less than 0.1%. So there's a lesson for India.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, as far as China is concerned, as Ajit said, the question is what can we export to China? If you really sit down and make a list, the list is not very wrong. And the answer to Mr. Dudeja's question, 1-point solution to all our problems, improve the investment climate. Make it easy for an investor to start a business, run a business in this country. Believe me, it is not easy, regardless of what we've done for ease of doing business or regardless of all the simplifications. So that is the only solution. Or kya solution hai? If you can't make it yourself, you have to depend on someone. Unfortunately, the person you have to depend on is China.
So, but why is it not happening? For years we've been talking.
You have to ask a businessman that. Ask a businessman.
Yeah, guys, thank you. I think if I open that up, I must open for everybody. The 3rd question was about US preparedness. So we'll take Dr. Ray.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think the US is not prepared. In fact, one of the first impacts was their bond market tanked, and then, but the impact will be in terms of inflation because they not only import, they import many things, including food, footwear, all of these things. So it's the question is that will the importers actually pass on the full amount of the the increase in the tariff, the cost, to the consumers, or will they absorb some of it, or or will it just be an increase in government revenue? I think we don't know that for a fact, but some of it, the inflation, there will be some inflation definitely.
Yeah.
I want to comment also on the same question of if US can substitute products that they are importing from abroad. Definitely not the answer, because they cannot substitute all kinds of products. Many of the products they are importing, they are labor intensive, and US, they don't have that capability to produce such kind of products. So they will end up importing, as Dr. Ray said, they will import it with a high cost and it will cause inflation. So it will only harm them at the end.
So you were saying something.
To answer Siddharth's question, in my experience in government as to why is it not happening, we are in a unique position where we are resolving the issues of establishment of a nation state, resolution of the problems of development, and a full-fledged democracy happening together. No country which is developed today faced those circumstances when they were developing. So we are too chaotic as a political economy for any countrywide reform to happen meaningfully, for any countrywide reform to reflect in actual ease of doing business for industry. So I don't blame anyone. That's the nature of our political economy today. So that is why you have to create a platform which is divorced from the chaos that prevails generally. That is what China did. They created a platform which was divorced from the rest of the Chinese economy. And it was fashionable to say then that, our villages are better than theirs, our cities are better than theirs. But then their SCZs became much, much, much better than yours, and the SCZs took over the country. So we have to create a platform which credibly creates a good environment for investors and insulates them from the general chaos which prevails. That is my experience in government in 40 years, because we are not individually going to find solutions to any problem. Power sector reform, I was in the UP Electricity Regulatory Commission in 1999. Since then, we've been doing shadow boxing with power sector reform beyond us, and it's not going to happen. The SCBs are going to continue losing money. We have a new innovation called regulatory assets. Delhi seems to be a good arrangement, but Delhi is sitting on 20,000 crores of regulatory assets. 20,000, 40,000. So at a nationwide level, we can't resolve anything. Those are our circumstances.
I think it's time. I'm not going to summarize it because there is so much that we all heard, and each one of us picked up multiple areas. The energy and enthusiasm in the room, the expertise not just on the dais but also among some of you, shows that there is a whole lot more that we could have covered, but for the constraint of time. All that's left for me is to say thank you so much to each and every one of you for taking time out, and thank you very much for participating actively into this. That's what makes it what it is. I'll hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Koina, to take it forward. Thank you so much.